We've got Sergeant Cheryl Dorsey with us. She's a retired Los Angeles Police Department sergeant. She started with the LAPD in 1980. She worked in patrol and specialized units, including gangs. She promotes social justice advocacy, and she's an author of Black and Blue, The Creation of a Social Advocate. Also with us, Stephen Gaynor. Stephen spent 25 years as a police officer and homicide detective. He was a sergeant in the police department's Ranger unit, and he currently holds dual leadership roles in the Fraternal Order of Police. Sergeant Stephen, appreciate you coming tonight. Let's take a look at the story first, and then me, along with everyone who's watching tonight, wants to hear your perspective on all this. So again, this is from WRTV in Indianapolis, a police shooting streamed live on Facebook.
No justice, no peace. Those are some of the phrases that protesters are chanting behind me. Quite a large crowd gathered outside of the city county building in downtown Indianapolis after a man was killed by IMPD following a police chase last night.
I ain't got no respect for whoever did it. I have no respect. I have hate in my heart for him. Hate. If he would have just locked my brother up, okay then. You feel me? He was wrong. Lock him up. But you shot my brother 16, 17 times.
The family of Sean Reed devastated. Protesters upset over what they saw on Facebook Live Wednesday evening. Reed live streamed the entire incident and the final moments leading up to his death. What began as a police pursuit around 6 p.m., officers say the suspect was seen driving recklessly on I-65 near 30th Street. IMPD Police Chief Randall Taylor was actually one of the officers who first spotted the driver. Another officer from the Northwest District then saw the car once he got off the interstate and pursued the suspect for some time before Reed pulled over at 62nd and Michigan and began running. In the video, you hear a buzzing sound like a taser, followed by several gunshots. Then the man falls to the ground.
It's just tragic. I just ain't got no respect for the law system here. It's just ridiculous. I mean, it's been going on for too long, and it need to change. Somebody need to put a stop to it, because I mean, just don't kill innocent people like that.
IMPD tells RTV6 shots were fired from both the suspect and the black male police officer. Chief Taylor saying he's heartbroken over the life lost tonight. And at this point, he has no reason to believe the officer didn't act appropriately, but is willing to wait and see how the investigation plays out.
I understand where you're coming from. I understand concerns. I would hope that you allow us to run the investigation. Understand that everything that you may see on social media, or everything you may hear on social media, may not be accurate.
All right, I want to start this conversation with this question. How do you determine if this was a justified shooting? Because there's going to be an investigation. What are the factors? Let me bring in Sergeant Cheryl Dorsey. I want to begin with you. I think we lost Stephen's signal for just a moment. Sergeant, where do you start here? How do you determine if this was a justified shooting? What are the factors that go into all of this?
So an officer is allowed to use only that force reasonable and necessary to overcome resistance, or in the immediate defense of life, IDLE. It's an acronym that we use on the Los Angeles Police Department, and I don't think that that's significant to just my department. Immediate defense of life, the officer or another person. If this young man had a weapon, and if he was firing back at officers, the shooting is justified. The young man has to accept culpability, and while it's hurtful, listen, he had a part to play in this. First of all, he's fleeing, he's evading, he's exceeding the speed limit, he's putting others in danger. That's a problem. And I saw the video on Facebook. I saw friends of his encouraging that foolishness with emojis that were laughing and hearts and all of that. He was having a good time until he wasn't having a good time. And so unfortunately now he made a decision to get out of his vehicle armed and fire in the direction of an officer. What would you have the officer do?
I think Stephen Gaynor is back with us. Stephen, from your perspective, how do you determine if this was a justified shooting? What are the factors that you take into account? What makes it? And when I say justified shooting, that's a legal term. I mean, that's a justifiable homicide is a determination that can be made by a court, can be made by a prosecutor as well. So, from your perspective, what are the elements here that we need to flush out? That we need to figure out what happened here?
Well, I agree with everything the Sarge said. I had a little technical difficulty and cut out during that process, but if there was a perceived danger to the officer or another, he had the right to shoot. I couldn't see the video to see what was going on, but I believe that if he or she, the officer perceives a threat, they have the right to shoot. And you have to look at all the factors involved. Now, granted, the individual put themselves in this predicament. I'm sorry that it ended in the loss of their life, and he didn't deserve to die, but he caused a lot of the factors to occur by running, it almost looks like he maybe wanted it to be a game. He thought it was funny to live stream running from the police. And given today's society and the way things are, officers have to be more cautious, because when both Sarge and I started, there was a lot more respect for the police. People really didn't fight with you as much. They definitely didn't shoot at you like they do nowadays. Now, it's nothing for people to shoot at you to kill an officer. Look at the number of officers we lose every year due to gun violence. So there's even more cautious approaches from the officers out there on patrol. And I think that the citizen population needs to know that they're just as nervous as you are when you're getting stopped. And so you've got to exercise some care and concerns just like they do. And I think that in this case, the gentleman put himself in some situations which caused the end result. And the investigation will have to go forward. I mean, officer-involved shootings are very in-depth. Usually an outside agency handles it with a neutral appearance at it, particularly in one that's attracting so much public attention. And just see where all the factors. I urge the population and the folks that are upset, I understand you're upset, but sit back and wait for the facts to come out. You saw a video, but the investigation is still going on. There are other things that are going to come out in the investigation that, may lay some groundwork to say, it's a terrible thing, but God, he shouldn't have done that.
Let me say this, because while I think the shooting was a justified shooting, immediate defense of life, I do have a problem with the number of rounds, if this is true, that were fired. 16, 17 rounds. The way I was taught and trained on the Los Angeles Police Department is we fire 2 rounds in rapid succession, and then we reassess the threat. So I don't know how many rounds, if any. Well, they said that he was firing back, he being Sean. I don't know how many rounds Sean fired in the direction of the officers, but certainly by the time they got to maybe round 7 or 8, they should have been able to determine whether or not Sean still possessed a threat. At what point did a bullet strike him and now he's no longer a threat? Was it a matter of contagious gunfire? How many officers were firing? Was it just one officer who emptied a 15-round clip, or were there several officers? And so those are the questions as a supervisor that I have. Was there contagious gunfire, and did they reassess the threat? 16, 17 rounds sounds excessive.
Now, I'm gonna not agree with that based on the experience I had in the homicide unit as an officer-involved shooting investigator, because the stress level is so high in these situations. You'll go to an officer and go, "Hey, how many rounds did you fire?" And they'll go, 2. And you look at the ground and there's like 8 shell casings there, and they have no clue. They just pull the trigger. That's one situation. Another situation I had is where an individual is engaged with the police firing rounds. They're both firing rounds. He even reloads, but he's hit about 9 times before the final shot takes him out. So, that this gentleman's hit 16 times doesn't mean he was down. I got an officer friend that was hit 9 times and he was never out of the game, but he took 9 rounds. So it depends where the rounds go as opposed to the 16. And then a lot of people will say, well, there's some in the back. So I don't know in this case, but as people turn and people move and duck and weave, rounds go everywhere, because once you pull the trigger, if you weave, it could go, could hit you in the back. So there may come out in the investigation that he's hit in the back. I want people to understand that that's not that they were shooting him while he was running away. He may have bobbed and weaved. He may have turned. There's all kinds of factors that happen in here in an officer-involved shooting, and that justifies the number of rounds. And I've also had a SWAT individual with an automatic weapon who said, yeah, I fired 5 rounds, and by the time we picked up all the round casings, he had like 20 rounds on the ground. So a lot of times the officer has no clue how many they fired, and it's a stress level. So they just keep pulling the trigger as long as the stress is there and they perceive the danger. And I think that may be a situation here where you got 16 or 17 rounds into this young man.
I understand that stress is a situation. Can I just say something real quick, or do you need to interject, Benny?
Real quick.
Okay, I understand that stress is a situation, but an officer better know how many rounds you're firing, and that's why we receive an inordinate amount of training, and that's why we practice so much that we do. Every department is different. I get that. But when you're shooting a weapon, you doggone better know, because listen, at some point you're going to run out of rounds. So you need to know how many rounds you're firing. And that is why in the Los Angeles Police Department, we are trained to reassess. If the threat no longer exists, you don't get to just fire rounds because you happen to have more and you're stressed out. If you're too stressed and you can't be cognizant of the tactics that you're using in a deadly force situation, then maybe you should be retrained, or better yet, on the desk. You don't get to just fire rounds downrange and then say, oh, my bad, did I fire 50 or 100? I don't know. And it's okay.
Great insight.
That was as quick as I could say it.
We've got more stories to cover. More crime time when we return. Out of the state of New Jersey, Jersey City, there's a street brawl, and then police respond to try to get the situation under control. And now people are attacking the way the police responded. We've got the video when we return.
She ended up having to take a detour because they were working on the road or something, and she ended up going a different way she doesn't usually go, and that happened.
You took not only someone's daughter, you took a little sister from us, you took a friend from many.
All right, that's one of the stories we're working on tonight in Crime Time. A 16-year-old shot and killed by a stray bullet. We'll get to that in a moment. What we do during Crime Time is take a look at these stories from around the nation, get some insight from our law enforcement experts. Still with us tonight, Sergeant Cheryl Dorsey, retired sergeant from the LAPD, and Stephen Gaynor, former homicide detective and member of the Fraternal Order of Police, leadership role there. All right, next story, though, comes from Hudson TV in Jersey City, New Jersey. A street brawl brings police into action.
Oh, 6 feet, 6 feet, 6 feet. Oh, 6 feet. Oh, 6 feet. Oh, they bugging. Oh, they bugging on Boxwood. Oh, my man's fine. All right. Oh, he hitting feet. Oh, they bugging. Oh, they bugging. Oh, chill. Yeah, he bugging. He bugging. He bugging. Oh, he bugging. Yo, hurting. He done, coach. Yeah, my boy, he done too. Came through. Oh, he done. He done. Oh, they not done? They not done? Oh.
Absolute chaos. How dangerous are street brawls? How about for police? Sergeant Cheryl Dorsey, you look at that situation, it was dangerous to begin with. Police get there trying to break things up, and things break out again.
Yeah, that was bananas. And so listen, I always say there's never any exigent circumstance. I mean, they were fighting. As long as didn't anybody break out with a gun or a knife, I'd let them tucker themselves out, because what I don't want as a police officer to have what happened to those officers, be surrounded. Thank goodness no one grabbed an officer's gun. You've got people all around those officers. Their guns are available, accessible, exposed. Somebody could have easily, in the midst of all of that, grabbed an officer's gun out of his holster, and then Lord knows what would have happened. I mean, we can only imagine. And so there's no urgency. Let them tire themselves out until you have sufficient force to go in and make a separate the combatants and make sure that the officers are safe. My safety, my officer's safety is primary.
Stephen Gaynor, Sergeant Dorsey is describing what happens in hockey matches all the time, right? They fight until they get tired, then the refs come in. What are your thoughts?
Well, they've got quite a few officers there to engage them. Even more show up. It's just wall-to-wall people fighting everywhere. It is very chaotic. I agree. Where do you start? Very dangerous, and we are lucky. I'm sure somebody there had a gun in their pocket and nobody pulled it. And again, they jumped a few officers. It looks like they wrestled a little bit there, but they didn't try for the officers' guns. It was just pushing and shoving and punching. And it was just a good old street fight.
Next story from WRTV in Indianapolis. Another story out of Indy tonight. A family seeks justice for a 16-year-old killed by a stray bullet.
She just turned 16 in February. She didn't get a full life at all.
Nia Mae's godsisters, Larissa and Brittany, on this tragic death that's left their family in so much pain.
You took not only someone's daughter, you took a little sister from us, you took a friend from many, you took a granddaughter.
What makes the situation even harder for them is that Nia and her mom, Nikki, were just in the wrong place at the wrong time, trying to get some food and then heading home to Marion from Indianapolis.
Whatever way they took, she ended up having to take a detour because they were working on the road or something, and she ended up going a different way she didn't usually go, and that happened.
Those who knew and loved Nia are posting tributes to her on social media, many demanding justice for the teenager killed before she even had the chance to really live life. Her godsisters, who knew Nia all of her life, describe the young lady who's no longer with us.
She was real girly.
Definitely
She liked getting her
girl.
hair done. She loved doing makeup. She liked to be cute, and that's what she was. She was just so cute.
Every time I seen her, she had her hair done, her nails done. Always looked so beautiful.
And that's how she'll always be remembered, captured in these pictures, forever young. To the person who fired the shot that killed Nia, and anyone else watching this story, Brittany says this.
I mean, we have a right to carry guns. Keep them in your house for if someone breaks in. There's no reason to be walking around with guns on the streets. I hope people learn from this.
How difficult are these investigations? Stephen Gaynor, how tough is it? It's a stray bullet.
Ooh, it's going to be tough because you're going to have to hope that they got maybe some cameras in the area that might have picked up people. There's the rewards. Maybe that'll bring somebody out. It's going to be a lot of investigation trying to talk to people and see, how many rounds were fired, who might have actually fired the rounds. I'm sure it might have been gang related. And just as we had one of those in Atlanta here just recently, so it's tough. It's a very tough situation. And the one I think here was a 5-year-old in his bedroom, went through the wall and hit him and killed him.
Sergeant Dorsey, these are the difficult ones, right? Because you're not investigating motive or anything like that, because this was not an intended victim. This was a stray bullet that struck someone who had nothing to do with the people involved with whatever they were doing.
Well, we know that she was not the intended victim, but there may be someone who was intended for that bullet. And so there's going to be some investigation. There'll be some interviews. And listen, you know, these young people, they like to talk and they like to brag. And so based on, you know, what statements they might glean from folks who may be on the peripheral of whatever was going on, there's certainly a lot that we don't know. Oftentimes there's investigations that are going on, information that is known that's not released, because the officers don't want to jeopardize their investigation. And so I believe that someone knows something, and I hope someone will say something. Beautiful little girl, and my condolences to the family.
Absolutely. Sergeant Dorsey, Stephen Gaynor, appreciate your expertise, especially tonight. Thank you so much. Stay safe.